And Robert Daniels, the museum specialist, has a few words to say.
Hello folks, my name is Daniel Roberts.
Daniel Roberts, I got it wrong.
As you said, I am the museum specialist here. Just a few items of housekeeping for safety and comfort. Behind you, over here, are our bathrooms. Men are straight away, women kind of got to make a little J-hook. In case of a fire, primary exit is here, through the main doors of the building. If that area is blocked off, there's a fire exit in the back, far corner of the museum. There's also a water fountain over here.
Yes, our first speaker is going to be Elena Backus, Captain Backus, and she is very integral to all of this happening. Without her work and her leadership and her connection to the right people, this would have never happened. She did all the planning for this, got the band to come, and put all of this together so it's going to run smoothly, right? She is really good, and I congratulate her on her work, and let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you, that was a very warm welcome. Colonel McFarland, Colonel Retired Dunham, and other distinguished guests, good morning. Welcome to Fort Carson, Colorado. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Captain Elena Backus. I'm an active duty Army nurse, currently serving as the commander for the 193rd Medical Detachment here at Fort Carson. Over the past several months, I've had the privilege of working with Mr. Van Kuren to organize this event, and I'm honored to provide the opening remarks today. Thank you. With that being said, welcome to the recognition ceremony at the 109th Evacuation Hospital at the 4th Infantry Museum. A special thank you to those who have traveled from all parts of the country to be here. I know several of you have to come many miles for this weekend. Today we pay tribute not only to the remarkable service and dedication of the soldiers from the 109th, but also to the history and the lessons learned from this distinguished unit. As we reflect on the past, we are reminded that our present day successes are deeply rooted in the experiences and wisdom of those who came before us. The Army's rich medical history has significantly contributed to the medical innovations of today, and the 109th EVAC Hospital is no exception to that. While many of you may be here to honor your family members, as a nurse, it's equally important to carry forward the legacy and knowledge and skills imparted on us from the past. Before I turn it back over to Mr. Van Kuren, I'd like to take a moment to thank the 627 Hospital Center staff who helped put this together. The Army Band, thank you for coming all the way from Ohio, and most importantly, the 109th, or the 109th and the 193rd kind of mesh, but the soldiers from the 193rd Medical Detachment. The medics and nurses outside have been instrumental in doing all the behind-the-scenes work that made today possible. They have always been so supportive of one another and of me, and I am so proud of them and so happy to be their commander. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and thank you everyone again for traveling today. Mr. Van Kuren, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I echo what Elena said, that to get here is a chore, I know, and we found that chore to be worthwhile. Let's give ourselves a round of applause. You know, this is a great day for the 109th Evacuation Hospital, because 80 years ago, it landed on Utah Beach, July 19th, 1944. So it is in recognition of that day that the 109th landed on Utah Beach. My father-in-law was a part of that. My wife, Pat, is back here. And that was a significant experience for him. Also, this 109th did their Camp Carson here in June 21, 1943, was activated here. And it took a lot of work and a lot of effort to put this group together. And in the video that you'll see some of the video of Camp Carson. The program is here. I want to just take a look at the program real quick. The insert, I put this insert in from Dr. Canner, whose daughter did a book called In My Father's Words. And it's a book about her father who came a part of the unit and sent over 500 letters. And I'll read a little excerpt that she had sent later on. But if you look at the last couple sentences, it says that the patients were between 19 and 25 years of age who recently reached the continent. So we had young men and young women coming to this unit and working with these patients. And there's close to 26,000 patients that they had to take care of. So it's a real monumental time for the group of people, the members of this unit. We have a video that Dr. Kilgard did. He did many videos. I don't know if you've seen Dr. Kilgard's work, but he had lots of videos. And what I did is I consolidated the videos into a 10-minute splurge, so to speak, that kind of takes us from Fort Carson to the awards that they received. This unit started out with 296 members. There were 38 officers, 40 nurses, a warrant officer, and 217 enlisted men. So it was a nice sized unit, and it fluctuated later. I mean, there were more officers later, then there were more nurses, and as the war got on, it expanded beyond that. So what I'd like to do now is, if we can show the video of what Dr. Kilgard put together. He after the war, he was chairman of the basic science program at Marquette University Dental School. So he had some real insight into this. So this is a 10-minute snapshot of the 109th Evacuation Hospital.
It is a 400-bed hospital housed in tents that can be moved nearly any place in a few hours. The unit was activated on the 21st of June, 1943 at Camp Carson, which is located just outside of Colorado Springs, Colorado. The head man of the outfit is Colonel Prazak. He tells a red-headed sergeant who has lots of stripes on his arms what to do. Then the sergeant has other sergeants with not so many stripes who pass the word, and the Army calls these orders, on to us fellows. Just like you, Mom, tell Dad what to do. It works pretty well most of the time, but then there are times, just like at home, when Dad gets a little stubborn. At Camp Carson, we lived in what they called barracks, which were really like our little chicken hut, complete with pot-bellied stove. You can see the mops hanging on the side of the barracks and the storage box in front of the building. Let me tell you, that box is full of buckets and scrub brushes. That barracks floor was cleaned so much, I think, that we scrubbed at least half the floor away. Our bunks or beds had real straw mattresses, and we got a new fill of straw about each month. We also police the grounds every day. That means picking up everything larger than a pinhead that isn't growing. The sergeant in charge always said that he only wanted to see elbows in the bottom part of our anatomy. I must say, things are really organized in the Army. First, you do everything by the numbers. There's always a plan. There's a plan as to how to hang up your clothes. There's a plan as to how to lay out your clothes. There's a plan for placing the duffel bags on your bunk. These plans were in preparation for the inspections, which seemed to come too often. And if you goofed, there was always weekend kitchen police duty. Oh yes, I must tell you about the day they brought some jackasses over to the outfit. No, Dad, these were the real thing. Most of the guys hadn't seen one, not alone ride one. So you can guess the rest. That's me and the captain. In the background, you can see some hospital tents, which we put up for practice. Yes, of course, again, by the numbers. Remember, Mom, how you used to get me up early in the morning to milk the cows? Well, things are about the same at Camp Carson. Every morning, the sergeant in charge would blow his whistle and shout some words I shouldn't say and I don't know how to spell anyway. At Camp Carson, we ate well, and I have enclosed the menu for a fantastic Thanksgiving meal which the cooks prepared. We got plenty of fresh air and exercise while we were at Camp Carson. If it wasn't close order drill, it was a hike up the mountain road with a full field pack. Walking was a way of life at Camp Carson. Walking and hiking, or close order drill. It seemed like we were always walking. One thing though, and by the numbers, we got a rest break of 5 minutes out of every hour. And you can see that we really needed it. Later, we played war games. Walking, of course. This time we were spread out. Also, we had our lunch breaks. And that's when we had a chance to eat our box lunches. Only they called them K-rations. Oh yes, they let us wear our gas masks on some of our hikes, and I well remember how hot they were. We also practiced setting up our tents. Each fella carried half of the tent, so to sleep, you had to have a friend furnish the other half. From the pictures, you can see how beautiful the area was and how official we looked. On July 19th, the unit embarked on the HMT Isle of Guernsey. We all remember seeing the row of sunken ships as we approached the beach. We landed on Utah Beach and moved into a bivouac area near Barneville, France on July 21st. The hospital, now attached to the First Army, set up near La Salle on July 28th. During the first 24 hours, 159 operations were performed, and 1,300 casualties were treated in the 10 days the unit was located there. Colonel discussed the situation. He was one of the some 40 officers who served as physician surgeons or administrators. The headquarters tent was the office of a number of administrative officers and enlisted men. Here we see Captain Collier, Barlow Keeney, Bartholomew, Alan Bear, Donovan, Weller, and Conti. And Conti again with her dog. Donovan and Bert Cullen. From the registrar tent, we see Hirschman and Friedrichs. And then a view of the hospital. Returning again to the registrar tent where we see Wallace and Nick Clevis, and again Fredericks. There's always a number of support units that cannot be forgotten. The Post Exchange was operated by Bill Lamrick, who developed quite a reputation as a wrestler before the 109th left Czechoslovakia. And Bert Cullen seemed to have picked something up at supply. And we turn to the barber's tent, and here's no less than Vince Arrigo doing a shaving job on Ernie Gruber. And we all waited for the mail truck, and Gilbert Hamilton was our mailman. Of course, the letters were all censored by Warrant Officer Peckler before we got them. Smitty took care of the detachment bulletin board. And then we had the paint shop, where Stevens was responsible for all those good-looking signs. Hirschman pays a visit to a number of officers and nurses. Here is Conti with Taylor and Buckley. Hirschman looks into one of the tents, and the reward is a nurse, one of the replacements. Here we see Bergeron and Hirschman hand in hand. And Malloy does her laundry. Lots of laundry. And lots more laundry. Where VE Day was pronounced on May 6th, we all had a cigar to celebrate along with some liquid refreshments. General Eisenhower thanked all the members of the armed forces for their courageous work during the war, as did Colonel Prazak. The hospital then moved and set up in the city park in Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, becoming operational on May 11th. Here the unit functioned as a station hospital until June 15, 1945. The 109th Evacuation Hospital was awarded the Meritorious Service Unit Citation on September 20, 1945. Individuals also received awards. These included 1 Legion of Merit, 25 Bronze Stars, and 36 Certificates of Merit. The members of the unit are authorized to wear the ribbons for the European Theater of Operations, the Victory, and the American Theater, and Bronze Stars for campaigns in Northern France, Normandy, the Ardennes, Central Europe, and Rhineland. Hospital.
Never knew that story until I saw the videos that Dr. Kilgore did. One aside is that when they went to Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, there was a Panzer unit up above on a hill, and they came down and surrendered to the 109th. Came down with a white flag, and that unit surrendered to the 109th Hospital, which I'm sure they thought, what is this on the hill? With tanks overlooking them like this. So that's a real tribute to the work that the men and women did of this unit. Our next speaker is Kathleen Dunham, and she's a member of the Army Nurses Corps Association. I really appreciate Kathleen coming today. She entered active duty in July 1982 as a captain with her assignment at Fort Carson, right here. She retired as a colonel March 6, 2011, after 28 years of active duty service, Elena. 28 years, you got that?
More 4 years.
Her assignment included U.S. and European locations. Her final assignment was Director of Nursing Sciences at the U.S. Medical Center for Excellence in School program at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. Throughout a U.S. Army career, she held numerous roles as the head nurse, nurse midwife, nurse researcher and analyst, nurse educator, chief nurse, and deputy commander. Her awards, to name a few, included Army Nurse of 2007 and the Legion of Merit. Since retirement from the U.S. Army Nurses Corps, Dr. Dunham has been a professor at the University of Northern Colorado, and now is a professor emeritus teaching occasionally there at some doctoral programs. I'd like to welcome Kathleen. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe we have to lower this somehow. How do we do that?
It's a rumor that we shrink as we get older.
Yeah, it's a rumor, okay.
Okay. Well, good morning. Welcome to each of you. And I'm just so honored to be here, to definitely talk about 109th Beck Hospital. And what I'd like to do is take us all back a little ways in time. And that is before World War II really got started, the United States knew that healthcare in the battlefield needed to be boosted, so to speak. And so there were a lot of scholarships offered for individuals who wanted to become nurses at a lot of the major hospitals, usually in major cities across the United States, to build the rank and file of nurses to be available for when World War II did come. Now we'll kind of speed forward to when the nurses then for the 109th needed to report for active duty. And they knew it was coming. They didn't know what was coming. They knew it was coming. And they were very happy, of course, because we're all happy, nurses, to go ahead and come to Fort Carson, to go ahead and prepare. They didn't know what for. So they were working off of an old menu, so to speak, of what might occur on a battlefield and how they would do that, so to speak. And yes, there's physicians, I guess. There were a lot of auxiliary personnel with the hospital to help support all of this effort. But the nurses, we always feel that somehow we need to be a little bit of the heartbeat for wherever we are. And so they really didn't know what was coming forward. And there are various books, and I can give you sometime how to get hold of them. One is called Lipstick and Helmets. And it talks about how they prepared mentally for being away from their families, for getting ready to deploy where. They knew perhaps it was going to be the European theater. But remember, D-Day was a big secret. And so, as you know, they did move forward and prepare. And with all of the rest of the staff of the 109th, everybody had to be like a sheet of music. Everybody had to be on the same sheet of music. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the contributions that the nurses actually, when they deployed and they had casualties, they needed to be triage for the casualties. I realize that that is a physician role. However, in a lot of circumstances, the physicians were needed for surgery. And so then the nurses, we step up. And they did the triage of casualties. Also, many of you might not be aware that the nurses were also the anesthesia provider. And these days, we do have nurse anesthetists. And as we go forward, I'll talk a little bit about that. But they were the main provider for anesthesia. They also did what is called surgical assist. Usually when the physician is doing surgery, they need more than 2 hands in there sometime in the surgery. Holding things, moving things, not necessarily handing the instruments. So who stepped up to hand the instruments? It was the medics, what we would call medics now. Stepped forward, learned what the instruments were called, how to pass the instruments correctly and in a sanitary way. As we go forward then the triage, the anesthesia provider, the surgical assist, post-surgical care, and of course, the nurse's job wasn't over. Our job was never ended. And so then they were caring for the patients at the bedside. And it wasn't always just, just walk through and check a box. They had developed, and it developed over time, subliminally, and as a community, not only for the 109th, but for nursing in general, is how do we assess patients? How do we plan our care? And how do we put that care into action? And then how do we evaluate that care? Anyway, I want to speak this up a little bit. Even though the 109th Evac Hospital was labeled to be an evac hospital for the lightly and moderate wounded, they did have to step up and expand, as you know. And what we had to work from as nurses at that time was what happened during World War I. However, we had to suddenly move in, you can picture this in your mind, move into a setting where suddenly the injuries, the deaths, everything, the psychological impact, everything on the battlefield of World War II was much different than World War I. And it needed to be dealt with. And as you know, it had to be dealt with right away. And that's where a lot of the nurses come in. It's not only caring for the patients at the bedside, directing that care, but taking care of one another and taking care of, we always seem to somehow step up and feel it as part of our role to take care of the people that are there in our units. And just to close out, that as many of you know, many of the nurses of the 109th after World War II went on to be the nurse who provided anesthesia in rural U.S. Without them, there would not have been that additional skill and the ability to save lives in rural areas. And they became directors of nursing programs across the United States. And I was one of the beneficiaries of that. The director of the nursing program that I went to was a former World War II Army nurse. And let me tell you, even though it was a civilian program, we were being prepared for World War III, whether we knew it or not, which is good for me. But many of the nurses, as you know, and some of the nurses for the 109th did give their lives, whether it was immediately through warfare or through diseases or injuries sustained on the battlefield during this, there were casualties. And that's all I would like to say.
Thank you.
Thank you. How many nurses do we have here? So, how did that story resonate with you? How did it resonate with you?
With me?
No, with
Oh, yeah.
Betsy.
I only recently have started to begin to comprehend just how logistically challenging the work that they did in the field was in World War II. And the more and more I learn about it, it's just absolutely mind-boggling.
I have one thing to share if I could. In 2022, I deployed to Kuwait and we filled in the U.S. military hospital, Kuwait there at Camp Arifjan. In the video, they had said they did 170 some surgeries in about 24 hours. I was there for 9 months and we did 105 operations total in 9 months. So it really speaks to the impact and the influx and the flexibility and the adaptability needed at the time.
It really is something else. You really set the trademark for future nurses. Our next area is family presentations. And if you could put up, we have the photos of the next one after that. No, after that, yeah. That's my father-in-law. He never really talked about World War II, when I was there. And my wife, Pat, didn't have many experiences with it. He was a perfectionist. He had the bent one, he had everything perfect, and then his son-in-law comes along. And the first experience was I broke the key off in their front door lock. So here's this perfectionist soldier that served in World War II, and a son-in-law comes along, and he's not a perfectionist. And later, a table that they used to have people over and picnics and everything, the non-perfectionist broke it in half. So Pat's dad smoked a cigar, so when I walked in the house, the cigar got real chewy like that. Got real nervous. But it was surprising to me that he never talked about his experience in World War II. But he looked forward to the reunions. But I believe that these provided an outlet for him to reminisce with his unit members, acting as kind of a relief mechanism and thus releasing him of having to engage in family conversations and presentations about the horrific experiences he encountered in the European theater. I'm quite sure few of the unit members handled the same kind of situation at the reunions. The units encounters the same way my father-in-law did at the reunions. They may have used the reunions as an outlet for peace of mind. The display table over here is from what family members have brought in, materials and that kind of thing about the unit, so please take a look at that when you have the opportunity. So the non-perfectionist became a perfectionist, maybe, I don't know. The next person that I would like to recognize is Dr. Milton Cantor, and that was the little excerpt I took from Laura Zellman, his daughter's book. Laura wrote this: "My dad, Dr. Milton Cantor, served in World War II as an Army doctor from 1941 to 1945. He was with the 109th Evacuation Hospital for a good portion of his service. During these years, he wrote over 500 letters to his wife. I took excerpts from these letters and published my book in my father's words. The main theme that runs through these letters is how much my dad loved this country. He was honored to serve and treat the soldiers who came through this hospital. He viewed his mission as protecting America from Nazi tyranny. He wanted to ensure that his children would grow up safe and sound and secure in a democratic, free society. He was willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for this cause. He liked salami. I've never heard of that. He and his friends would hold salami parties. When a package arrived from the States with a valuable item, providing brief moments of levity. Milton Cantor, Dr. Milton Cantor, was an ordinary man who proudly did his best under extraordinary circumstances." And so that's kind of capsulizes all the things we're talking about here today. We have our next family member that is going to present is Dr. Betsy White.
So my name is Betsy White. I am the great niece of Doris Donovan. Doris was the chief nurse of the 109th, and she was a nurse anesthetist. So I'm very grateful that Doris had the opportunity in 2000 to give an oral history to the Women's Memorial in DC, which was a very important experience for her. Thankfully, she was actually able to go visit the memorial before she died. And so I'm going to let some of her words speak for themselves and just read a couple of short excerpts from her oral history. So she wrote, "More than 59,000 American nurses served in the Army Nurse Corps during World War II. They were closer to the front lines than they had ever been before. In addition to the ground hospitals, they served on hospital ships, trains, and transport planes. The skill and dedication of these nurses contribute to the extremely low post-injury mortality rate among the American military forces in every theater of war. Overall, fewer than 4% of the soldiers who received medical care in the field and during evacuation died from wounds. My experiences and memories of World War II have affected my whole life." And then she says a little bit here too about the evening of the D-Day invasion. So she says, "The night of the invasion was difficult for me. We all sat outside our tents and watched the big C-47s towing gliders filled with paratroopers who were to land behind the German lines at France. We counted over 10,000 just in the time we were there." I'm going to say that number again, 10,000 planes flying overhead. "As each one went over, we shook our heads in amazement. The skies were just black with planes and gliders. Not knowing where they were going or whether they were going to get back was very traumatic for me. When the C-47s came back between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning without their gliders, they looked like Christmas trees with their red and green lights. Remembering those returning C-47s, I can still feel the emotions I felt then. Of course, we know that some of the gliders landed in trees and one in a church steeple. The Germans shot that paratrooper as he was hanging there. And that passage in particular always really stuck with me, and just that imagery of being in England and just watching those planes go overhead and just being this sense of that you were part of this bigger thing that was happening. And one of the other documents that Doris kept was a diary that Elvin Quering, who was another member of the unit, had kept, and I have a copy of it on the table there. And he had a very similar description of what that looked like. And then on the recent, the D-Day anniversary, I actually saw some of the film footage of what that was like. And I can only imagine the emotions and what that felt like, just that you were part of this greater thing that was happening. And then the last quick excerpt that I just wanted to read here. So she said, life in the field was difficult but rewarding. The time spent with so many cooperative and hardworking people is long remembered. After having reread the edited version of my Life of the 109th Evacuation Hospital, my head is spinning with memories I cannot put onto paper right now. And I can really say that her military service was one of the most important, if not the most important things that Doris did in her lifetime. And I'm really grateful that she had the opportunity to get an oral history down. She also kept many photographs, documents of the unit, which our family have now donated to the University of Pennsylvania, the Base Nursing History Center, so they can be properly archived and to preserve the history of the unit. And it also has been such a wonderful learning experience for myself. So I'm a nurse, I've been a nurse for about 20 years. Doris died when I was 1 year out of my nursing program. And I really, I grew up hearing war stories as a kid and a teenager, and I had absolutely no understanding or appreciation of what that was actually like. And within recent years, coming across Jim's book, coming across some of the documents and photographs and archive that Doris had, the more and more I learn about it, just again, as I said before, absolutely mind-boggled about the logistics and the work and what that must have been like. And yeah, so this was definitely one of the most rewarding things that Doris did in her life, and very proud of that work, and grateful to Jim for having us all here to remember the men and women of the 109th.
Barbara Wilson, I believe you have a presentation.
Hi, I'm Barbara Wilson, and I am, it's the other PowerPoint.
Oh, it's the other PowerPoint.
Right, yeah, thank you. I am the great niece of Grace O'Connor, and that was a picture of her, and there she is, she's second in. And that picture is thanks to Doris Donovan, I just want to say Doris Johnson, Donovan, and she joined when she was 36, so my guess is she was one of the older nurses there. If you want to take the picture, I am here with my 5 sisters. There's 6 of us who are Aunt Grace's great niece, Peg, myself, Kathy, who is also a nurse, MJ, Chris, and Kara. And if you change that picture, and that was just at 4th of July together. And this is our first trip we've done together in over 20 years, so it was really impactful. Jim, thank you so much for organizing this. And we are thankful to my big sister, Kara, who's the youngest of us all, because Kara is the reason why we are here, because she put together, my Aunt Grace wrote letters home to her sister for 3 years, her sister Agnes. And we have her letters, and Kara put them together in a beautiful album for us and gave them to us, not this 4th of July, but last year on 4th of July, is when we get together. And she also put together this wonderful book that follows where the letters are. And so it's kind of giving us the history of what was happening in the war and where they were traveling. And she did that with great support and help from Jim. And the book that you wrote, Jim, a tribute to the 109th Evacuation Hospital, was a huge help for her, and also all the letters in there from Betsy, her great aunt, Joyce Donovan. So thank you for that, because it was an incredible gift. And The next picture, this is the letters, and I just wanted to read a couple of excerpts. One was a really quick one from her that I want to share her Christmas letter in 1944. But first, I'm just going to read one in November. It says, "Last night we occupied ourselves with our fire. We have coke and coal dust. We can't make coke burn, and coal dust makes an excellent fire extinguisher. We broke up everything but our cots. We worked for 3 hours on it and went to bed. We had heat enough to heat our water for baths and make a cup of tea. I woke up frozen at 2:30 a.m. and believe it or not, it was wild because I couldn't go on duty because I was frozen. Hope you are reading your newspapers. We have been extremely busy and expect to be for a while." And so that was late November. And then there's a big gap in her letters because we all know how busy they were in November, late November, and December. And so this was a letter from the diary of Alvin Berg, just a short thing on December 25th or 24th. "When the Germans broke through our lines in Belgium during December, we were alerted and moved with very little notice from Boulay to Metz for temporary bivouac on December 24th. While in Metz, we were in buildings which were part of a very large German hospital. We spent Christmas here." And so that's where she was on Christmas. So evidently they moved December 24th. They must have been set up. And this was about Christmas Eve that she writes to her sister on Christmas. "Dear Agnes, this is paper I had from Joan from Christmas. Johnny's cute box came last night. The box of Hershey's are wonderful. Also the Kleenex and soap. We have a table in our room. Did I tell you we are in a different building, moved, you know? Well, we have a large, high-ceilinged room with 3 ice-cold radiators and 3 huge windows, 6 of us. So we made a table and put our goodies from home on it. The little Sandy is atop a bottle, unopened, of gin. There is a round fruitcake in the center with a gay mademoiselle in the bowl. We found a white candle and tied a red ribbon around it, and last night after midnight mass, I lit it for a while. We are not working. Mass in a small deserted chapel. It was as cold as the first Christmas, I guess, despite the 4 pot-bellied stoves with the pipes going out the windows. It was filled last night with medics. The altar was simple, trimmed with fir branches. A very modern Madonna and St. Joseph in the right places, surrounded by small bulbs. Statues on the wall high, St. Teresa, St. Anthony, his head knocked off by what happened before we came. The church so quiet, and the choir, nurses and a doctor with a violin, old-fashioned organ with a GI playing Silent Night. And just at 12, the big door opened, and in came the boys with their guns, tired, cold, dirty, gaunt looking. This impressed me more than anything I ever saw. I didn't feel sad, but I had a little weep for myself. And when I came out, found everyone else felt the same. We went to communion and came home and had a sandwich and went to bed until 11 a.m. today, when we got up and came to eat turkey dinner out of the mess kits. It was good. I'm waiting for supper now, and it's almost time, so I guess I won't start another page. We'll tell you more again. Love to you all. Pray for me. Grace." I think that is just an amazing letter to just think about what they were going through and what they did, and how the little things like lighting the camp was just a special thing they shared. Our Grace came home, and she was with us, and you want to go to the next? Oh, this is her around our kitchen table. She passed away in June, 35 years later. Peg was 23 at the time, Carol was 8, and only Peg had a little bit of a conversation with her about her time. None of us did, and we regret so much. So it was so wonderful to be able to track this down and learn about it, because we never had that. We just remember her as always fun. She never married. she was always just fun and positive and upbeat and just a joy to be with and not just talk. Thank you so much for doing this, Jim. We so appreciate it, and it's a wonderful thing to just
Thank
share
you.
this with you.
I got tears. Virginia, are you?
Yes, right here.
Okay.
Right. My name is Virginia McGovern Volpe, and I'm here with brothers and sisters. This is my brother John and his wife Mary, my sister Teresa and her husband Mark, and where's Chris? And there's my sister Chris with her husband Greg and her son Richard, and that is my husband back there. So I was really glad that so many of my family, I could talk them into coming. I learned a lot by doing this. And one thing, John spent many an hour, my daughter actually for a 7th grade project interviewed my dad about World War II and taped him, and he talked about the black skies with the planes going over and all that. But my brother found this book and went over it with my dad, like literally turned pages that dad does, and we tagged moments in his life over there. And we'll bring this to lunch and you can look at it. And he wrote things in this book. This is where we were and all those things. So we'll bring this book because it's a really good book. Really, we liked it. At the beginning of this book, my dad wrote a letter. And this is one of the sentences in his letter that I loved. He said, "Our world took us through the Great Depression. We fought World War II at home and abroad, and then rebuilt the world into the modern era we all enjoy today." What a great sentence. So my dad let me ask you all a question. Who here remembers Mercurochrome? I see, I know it, yes. Mercurochrome, staple in every house. We're gonna get back to that. My dad was an instrument handler in the 109th. I don't really know how my dad got assigned to this unit, but I'm glad he did. He was an instrument handler, which in surgery, in the operating room. He gained a lot of skills by being in that operating room. He wasn't a doctor or anything, he was just, well, like she said, you just jump in, you dig in, and there you are, you're part of it. He gained a lot of I think, things that he brought home later. His favorite show was MASH. He loved MASH. He would laugh. He'd say, "Yeah, that's about how it went." There's a scene where they're doing stitches on somebody, and he asks, "Well, should I make large stitches or small stitches?" Surgeon says, "Well, is he an officer or an enlisted man?" "Well, he's an enlisted man. I'll make him big." And Dad chuckled. I remember Dad chuckling, going, yeah, that's how it was. That's really how it was. Dad, Patton came through. He wrote in this book, General Patton came through camp one day riding in his Jeep. Everyone gave a quick cheer and wave, and then it was back to work. His driver would drive crazy, and only the brave or foolish would ride with him in the General's Jeep. So he did get to see, like she said, we're part of a bigger thing. He saw Patton. They took in a great deal of wounded from the Battle of the Bulge. He went to Prague. They moved into Prague for like 4 months. I think that was their final posting. He said it was more like we were tourists, because by then the war was winding down over there in Europe. He says more like we were tourists than GIs. But the thing I wanted to talk about was not only what my dad gave to the 109th and what the 109th gave to the world, but what the 109th gave to my dad and gave to us, consequently. Dad came home. He went to college on the GI Bill. He got a degree, he got a job, he married, bought a house, and started having kids. And we had 8 kids, very active children. Dad in the war was an instrument handler. At home, he was the injury handler. There was no end to bumps, scrapes, lacerations, cuts, wounds, burns, everything. That was it. Hence the Mercurochrome. Mercurochrome was a staple in our house. I think he bought it by the pint. And we all remember that orangey reddish smell. Yeah, we'll never lose that. My dad, in his skills that he learned from the 109th, could do things. One of my sisters said she had this bulge that kept moving around. It would show up and go away. And he looked at it and goes, oh, that's a hernia. Yes, he could diagnose things like that because of what he had learned. He could take out stitches when my sister ran her bicycle off the road and into a culvert and needed stitching up. And then later on, taking out you don't need to go to the doctor to take out the stitches. I know how to take out stitches, and so we use that skill too. One of our family members needed injections. I remember thinking, now how does he know how to give shots? Well, I know now how it was because of the 109. Remember, we didn't have YouTube back then. You know, if you weren't taught that skill, you didn't have that skill. There wasn't any looking it up to see how you did a shot. He learned it in the 109 over there. So his specialty was Mercurochrome and bandages, and that's how he patched us up and sent us back out. I am grateful to the 109th for his training. I'm grateful to the 109th for supporting our troops over there. I'm grateful to the 109th for not being right on the front line, because it meant, and he even mentions that in his book, they weren't right on the front line, so, you know, he was able to learn these things, bring them back home. He was able to come home, go to college on the GI Bill, earn a degree, get a job, get married, buy a house, have kids, and patched us all up with Mercurochrome. Thank you, 109.
Thank you. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Bruce? Bruce Roy.
Captain Backus and Dr. Van Kuren, military members, staff, museum director, and friends and family of the 109th. My name is Bruce Wyrock. I came down from Juneau, Alaska. My dad was 19 when he landed on Utah Beach. Larry Butler, he was an orderly. He never talked about his war experience. I never talked with him because after this terrible time which he went through, he came home and was killed by a drunk in 1953. So what I've learned is from the hundreds and hundreds of letters, talking to my mother, reading Dr. Van Kuren's book, and I appreciate coming here today. The one story I know about my dad when he was in the 109th was when they were in the Battle of the Bulge, apparently. And this story comes from my uncle. He was in the command post in a field, a barn, or a farmhouse, and they were using that as command post and bringing wounded to, before they could bring them back to the 109th. Well, for treatment, and some were critically wounded. And one thing my mom said is he wanted to go in the medical field, he thought, but he woke up in sweats and screaming in the middle of the night, and so he couldn't do that. But when the Germans, the Nazis, pushed their offensive forward, they had to abandon the field house, and these wounded were so critically wounded they couldn't be moved or they would die, and so they had to be left behind, which means at the hands of the Nazis they're probably going to be killed or maltreated. So Dad said, well, somebody's got to stay with them. So he stayed with them to be captured, but let's move them upstairs into the second story of this farmhouse. And then when you leave, make it look like it's been damaged, the stairs, so nobody knows we're up there. So the Germans came and occupied the field house when he was upstairs with the wounded, and he took his boots off and was walking around, put tape on the mouths of these soldiers who were the wounded, and was there for 2 days upstairs with these people. And then the Allies pushed back, recaptured the field house, and then took the wounded back to the evacuation hospital. And there's a letter over there, and I appreciate the memorabilia table and all the books. He got a battlefield commission for the patent for that, and that's pretty much what I know about my dad's military experience. And so thank you all for sharing your experience over here, which I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
You're a good person. Thank you for being here. Our last speaker is Mario Polito.
Morning, everybody.
Morning.
First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Van Kuren, Dr. Klitgaard. There's George McGee's, was another participant. His daughter has provided not a manuscript, but a collection that describes her father's mission, who he handled the mail for the unit. So all these sources of information have been really intriguing. My father was an X-ray technician and spoke a little bit about it, but when you're young, you listen, but you don't absorb it. So thank you all for showing up. And I have a couple of notes here. Starting with the term, the greatest generation has been used to describe this generation as gentlemen born from 1901 to 1927. The term was popularized, but Tom Brokaw wrote a book called Greatest Generation. And in that book, he interviewed a lot of people, and there was a common thing. He mentioned that this generation endured part of World War I, lived through the Depression, and just came together for World War II, both on the battlefield and in the country here. What he mentioned was a nation came together because that was the right thing to do. And speaking with family members of the unit, I've spoken with probably about 12 different families. There seemed to be a common theme, and some of the characteristics that are attributed to this generation were that they are all patriotic and willing to sacrifice for their country. They were driven and motivated by a sense of duty, honor, and faith. And they showed a strong work ethic and personal responsibility. They lived modestly and humbly, and they valued family and community. That has been really reinforced listening to all the accounts here today. And I know my father lived through those qualities as well. Getting to my father, his name was Abel Polito. He was 30 years old. He's a little bit older than the typical recruit enlisted man. And he came from Modesto, California, which is in Northern California, agricultural area. And he entered service on Monday, November 16, 1942. 50 years later to the day, on Monday, November 16, 1992, he passed away. It's just, and I didn't know that at the time. It was right to the date. He spent the 36 months in service. He was a Tech 4. His primary assignment was an X-ray technician. And some of his duties encompassed working with the X-ray equipment. He developed films, kept the record files, and like many of the other participants, also was a truck driver when they were putting down the unit, hospital unit, and going to a different location. He drove truck, driving a 6x6 GMC. Some of his other duties included being a supply sergeant for the hospital personnel. He handled mail, which I think that's where he and George McGee kind of crossed paths. And then after the war, he was a duty sergeant for the displaced personnel. A lot of the stories that I remember always included two of his best friends. One in particular was a fellow named John Price. My father never went to any of the reunions, and I don't know why, but I don't believe that Roy Nelson or John Price and he ever spoke. And I was very fortunate to actually meet both of them. Roy Nelson and his wife Maxine had come by and visited my mother after my father had passed, and I just happened to stop in that afternoon and got to talk to them for some time. In about 2014, I had left a message on John Price's phone. I had received his phone number from the newsletters from the reunions. I left the message and I didn't hear anything back. About 2.5 months later, one Sunday morning, I was watching a football game, I get a call, and it was from John Price, the son of John Price. And so we kind of connected, and he said, "Do you want to talk to my dad?" So I had an opportunity we spoke over an hour, and I think Mr. Price was probably about 93 or 4 at that time, and his mind was just sharp as a tack. He brought a lot of recollections, and I had questions about some of the stories that my father had mentioned, one of which they were in Belgium hunting for a wild boar, and a boar was charging my father's rifle locked up. And this charging boar was kind of, lucky Mr. Price was there, and he's the one that nailed the boar, so. Anyways, yeah, so anyways, we've connected. John Price's son, we talked. He sent a bunch of photographs of his mom and dad. His mother was Leah Bergeron, who was a lieutenant in the unit as well. And so they became married, John Price and Leah. She had passed away, and John Price passed away in 2017. But my father, most of the stories were positive. He mentioned how cold conditions were and wet. But in general, everything was pretty positive. And beyond war, he ended up marrying my mom in '48. He had a 40-year career in radio broadcasting. He had different programs, Spanish language programs. He was inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He owned a grocery store. He and my mom ran a restaurant, member of the grand jury. He was an interpreter for the county court. He loved his family. So a lot of those characteristics that I described earlier, he lived throughout his life. And like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the folks that I spoke with, it seemed like their families also lived by those virtues. And in closing, there was a gentleman that Ernest Brewer, that he came on the video there. He and my father kind of worked together in the X-ray department, and when he learned that my father had passed away, he wrote a poem, and I would like to read this poem to finish off. And once again, it was Ernest Gruber who wrote it in July 1st, 1993. The poem goes, "Another buddy down. Slowly, slowly, one by one, as we call the roll, someone else's race has been run. They, too, have fought life battles, struggle over obstacles in their way, valiantly helping others, making it through a day. And though our lives once were bonded, ever so tightly held and bound, by our years together in the war, we long for that place where peace could abound. How our hearts can rejoice and our souls be glad that God, in His gospel of Jesus Christ, show and tell us where the peace can be found. So our prayers today, while we stand in our fitting ranks, is that God will help each of us for His salvation, salute, and give thanks."
Those are great stories. We've got the is recorded, right? This is being recorded. My
Yes, sir.
wife's phone, so I think it's good. If it was my phone, it wouldn't work. Really nice stories. It really brings the families together, and I'd like to present the plaque now.
It's in the podium.
Where is it? No, it's in here. Plaque to the museum. That if you look on the last page of your program, this is what I'm presenting. This is the plaque I'm presenting, and probably the most telling part is that they treated wounded soldiers under the most trying and unimaginable conditions to keep the torch of freedom and liberty blazing and bright. So this is to the museum for their use to post when they want, and we appreciate you hosting this today. Appreciate it. I'd like to make some closing comments. I want to thank all of you for attending today. This was a great celebration. Elena, thank you for your work. And it's Daniel?
Yes, sir.
I got it right, okay. Daniel Roberts for hosting this at the museum. The event was, I thought, pretty good. Elena did all of this, put all this together and made it a nice ceremony for us to do. From the presentations that were done today, you can see why the members of the 109th Evacuation Hospital were called the greatest generation. For their bravery and doing extraordinary work, as the plaque read, under the most trying and unimaginable conditions to keep the torch of freedom and liberty blazing and bright. And that's what they did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, Elena, we are going to the golf course, right?
Yes, so
Tell us about that.
a few administrative